Okay, so the microwave. Is it like secretly zapping all the good stuff out of your food, or is it actually a super efficient, maybe even healthier way to cook? There's just so much noise out there.
Oh, definitely. It's one of those kitchen gadgets that everyone uses, but there's still this cloud of uncertainty around it for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Super convenient, sure, but is it good?
Exactly. And that confusion is why we wanted to do this deep dive. We've got these sources you shared, and we're really going to try and get into the nitty-gritty science of what microwave heating actually does to our food, like on a fundamental level.
Yeah, we're looking at everything from potential hazards that might form during cooking stuff like TPHs, all the way down to how it changes the big building blocks,
Yeah.
starch, fats, proteins.
Right. So our mission today is basically to cut through the headlines, look at what the research actually says in these sources, and figure out the real story.
And spoiler alert, it's definitely not just a simple good or bad. It's way more complex than that.
Okay, let's dig in then, because yeah, it really feels like there's a lot more happening than just, warming up last night's pizza faster. So where should we start? You mentioned one source looked at something pretty specific, biscuits.
That's right, yeah. Microwave-baked biscuits. It's a good starting point because biscuits are something familiar, usually oven-baked. And the traditional baking, well, it gives you the texture and color people like, but it also creates these things called thermal processing hazards, TPHs for short.
TPHs, okay, that sounds not great. What exactly are they?
They're compounds that often form during high heat cooking, and yeah, some raise potential food safety concerns. The study we looked at focused on 4 specific ones: acrylamide,
Oh, I think I've heard of that one.
yeah, gets talked about,
Okay.
and also 5-hydroxymethylfursural, or HMF, methylglyoxal, and 3-deoxyglucosone, quite the mouthfuls.
Okay. So what did the study find? Did just changing the microwave settings, like power or time, make a difference to these TPH levels in the biscuits?
It absolutely did. They tested different power levels, 440, 480, 520 watts, and different times, 2, 2.5, 3 minutes. And they found a really clear direct link.
More power means more hazards.
Essentially, yes. As either the microwave power or the cooking time went up, the levels of all 4 of those TPHs increased too. It was pretty much a straight line on the graph, a linear relationship. More energy input, more hazard formation, at least in this specific setup.
Okay. So cranking up the microwave isn't necessarily benign when you're baking something like this. Were there any clues? Like, could you see or feel a difference in the biscuits that correlated with higher TPHs?
Yes, and this is where it gets really practical, I think. They look for correlations between the TPH levels and things you can measure or sense, like the color, the hardness, and the water activity, which is basically the amount of free moisture.
No, what did they find?
Strong links. Color was a big one, specifically something called the L-star value, which measures lightness.
So, like, how dark or light the biscuit was.
Exactly. And they found a really strong negative correlation. The lower the L-star value, meaning the darker the biscuit, the higher the TPH levels. For HMF, that link was incredibly strong, like a correlation coefficient close to minus 0.99.
Wow. So that nice golden brown color we often aim for, that's actually a signal for higher levels of these potential hazards.
In this context, yes, that's a key takeaway. They also found that harder biscuits tended to have higher TPHs, and biscuits with lower water activity, drier ones, also had higher TPHs, especially when the moisture dropped below a certain point, the levels shot up.
Okay, drier, harder, darker, higher TPHs in these microwave trials. But the million-dollar question, how does this stack up against regular oven baking? Did they compare?
They did, and they were smart about it. They didn't just pick random settings. They specifically compared microwave baking at 440 watts for 3 minutes to traditional oven baking at 190 Celsius for 7 minutes, because those particular settings resulted in biscuits with a similar texture.
Ah, okay. So they tried to make it a fair fight based on how the biscuit actually felt to eat, texture-wise.
Exactly. Comparing apples to apples, or maybe biscuits to biscuits based on texture.
And what happened when they compared biscuits with similar texture? Which method had more TPHs?
Okay, get this. The microwave-baked biscuits at that comparable texture level had significantly lower levels of all 4 TPHs compared to the traditionally baked ones.
Lower. Seriously. Wow. Okay, that kind of flips the common narrative, doesn't it? The idea that microwaves are somehow inherently worse.
It really does, at least for these specific compounds in the specific food cooked this specific way. And we're talking big drops, methylglyoxal down by over 60%, 3-deoxyglucosone down by about 30%. Acrylamide also down around 30%, and HMF down by over 61%.
That's actually pretty remarkable. So a microwave baking can potentially produce a biscuit with fewer of these particular hazards as long as you're aiming for a similar texture target.
What about taste and overall appeal? Did people prefer one over the other?
That's the nuance. The traditionally baked biscuits did score slightly higher in overall sensory tests, and the main reason cited was a preference for their more obvious color. The darker color again.
Exactly. The very color that the study's own correlation showed was linked to higher TPH formation in the traditional baking method.
So the thing people visually preferred was also the marker for more potential hazards in the traditional method. That's quite the trade-off.
It really highlights the complexity, doesn't it?
So summing up the biscuit study then, what's the main message for us?
I think the key insight is that microwave baking isn't inherently worse regarding these TPHs. In fact, it can be a strategy to significantly reduce them compared to traditional baking if you optimize the process for sensory targets like texture, rather than just chasing that deep brown color. It strongly suggests that intense browning itself is a direct indicator of TPH formation, and microwaves offer a path to similar texture with less of that specific chemical reaction.
That's a really practical point. Maybe that slightly paler microwave biscuit isn't a failure. Maybe it's actually lower in certain hazards.
Interesting. Okay, so that biscuit example gives us a concrete case study. But you mentioned the sources also. Let us zoom out right. I'd look at the bigger picture, how microwave heating hits the fundamental components of food, the macromolecules.
Exactly. We move now from that specific application to the broader principles discussed in the review source. And what's really fascinating is how microwaves interact with the big three: starch, lipids, which are fats and proteins. It's not just about heat. The review points to potential non-thermal effects too, unique ways the microwave energy itself interacts with these molecules.
All right, let's take them one by one. Starch first. It's in so many foods. What does microwaving do to starch?
Well, it definitely changes the starch structure. Things like its crystallinity, how it swells and gelatinizes, like when you cook rice or pasta. But here's a really interesting positive outcome the review highlights. Microwave heating can actually increase the amount of resistant starch, RS, and slow digestibility starch, SDS. Wait, increase. So you're saying microwaving could potentially make some starchy foods healthier. What's the deal with RS and SDS? Why are they good?
Precisely. That's the potential implication. They're considered beneficial because they resist digestion in your small intestine. They travel down further, more like dietary fiber, and get fermented in the large intestine. The upshot for you is that they slow down the release of glucose into your bloodstream.
Ah, so they lower the glycemic index. That sounds useful.
Exactly. Very relevant for people managing blood sugar, like those with diabetes, or anyone looking for more stable energy release or even weight management benefits. So the key insight here is, for certain starches, microwaving isn't just about speed. It might actually tweak the starch structure in a way that's metabolically beneficial.
That's a potential game changer for how we think about cooking carbs. Does this happen universally, though, like with any starch, any microwave setting?
No, the source is careful to point out it depends. It varies based on the microwave parameters, the power level, the time, the moisture content, and also the specific type of starch you're starting with. So it's not a guaranteed outcome, but the potential is definitely there.
Okay, good caveat. So let's move from carbs to fats, lipids. How does microwave heating affect them compared to, say, frying or baking?
Here again, the review suggests a potential advantage for microwaves. It often results in a lower degree of lipid oxidation compared to those traditional high-heat methods.
Oxidation. That's when fats go bad, right? Rancid.
Essentially, yes. It's the process where fats break down, which can create off flavors and potentially harmful compounds, so less oxidation is generally seen as a good thing.
So microwaves might be gentler on fats, maybe preserving more of the good stuff?
That seems to be the finding. The review mentions that microwave processing can sometimes enhance the antioxidant capacity associated with the lipids themselves and can lead to better retention of those beneficial polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs, compared to traditional baking or even air drying.
Okay, another potential point for the microwave, maybe preserving healthy fats better.
Potentially, yes. The insight is that it can be gentler, preserving more of the valuable fatty acids. Of course, you can still get oxidation if you go too long or use too high power, but the source suggests it might be more controllable than in some conventional cooking methods.
Right, makes sense. Okay, starch, lipids, that leaves proteins, the building blocks. What's the story there? What do microwaves do to proteins?
Proteins definitely get altered by microwave heating. The energy causes them to unfold, change shape, and sometimes clump together, which is called aggregation.
Okay, unfolding, clumping. How does that affect, say, how well we can digest them?
Well, this is where it gets quite mixed, according to the review. On one hand, that initial unfolding can actually improve protein digestibility. It exposes more sites on the protein molecule for our digestive enzymes to latch onto and break down. And microwaves can apparently achieve this unfolding faster than conventional heating.
Okay, improved digestibility. Sounds good. But you said mixed, so there's a downside too.
Exactly. If you overdo it, too much heat, too much power, too long cooking time, you can cause excessive aggregation and cross-linking. Think about overcooking an egg until it's rubbery, or chicken breast until it's dry and tough. That dense, aggregated structure actually becomes less digestible.
Ah, I see. So there's like a sweet spot, enough heat to unfold it nicely, but not so much that it knots up and becomes hard to break down.
That seems to be the implication, and it likely varies a lot depending on the specific protein, the food matrix it's in, and those cooking parameters. The review also mentioned something interesting, that microwave treatment can sometimes enhance a protein's own antioxidant properties, perhaps by creating smaller active peptide fragments.
Okay, this unfolding and changing shape, it makes me wonder about something else. Allergies. Can microwaving affect whether a food triggers an allergic reaction?
That is a really critical question, and the review highlights just how complex this is. It describes a bidirectional effect, meaning it can go both ways.
Both ways, how?
Okay, so in some foods, microwave treatment has been shown to reduce allergenicity. The review mentions examples like gliadin, which is part of gluten in wheat, or a protein in prawns called myosin. The idea is that changing the protein's structure might destroy or hide the part that the immune system reacts to, or make it easier for enzymes to break that part down.
Okay, reducing allergenicity. That sounds really promising for some people.
It does, however, and this is a big however, in other foods, microwaving can actually increase allergenicity. The source gives examples like peanuts and milk proteins.
Increase it! How could that happen?
Well, the heat and energy could potentially create entirely new structures on the protein new epitopes, which are the specific bits that antibodies bind to that weren't there before. Or the unfolding process might expose hidden epitopes that were previously tucked away inside the protein structure.
Wow. Okay, so depending on the specific food, microwaving could either make it less allergenic or potentially more allergenic. That's kind of scary.
It's definitely complex, and that's the crucial insight here. You absolutely cannot assume the effect will be the same across different foods. It's highly dependent on the specific protein, the food system, the parameters used. The source really emphasizes that this needs much more research, food by food. You can't generalize.
Yeah, that's a huge takeaway for anyone dealing with food allergies. It's not a simple fix, and microwaving something isn't necessarily going to make it safer. It could even make it worse in some cases.
Precisely. The review also briefly mentioned the Maillard reaction in the context of proteins, that browning reaction we talked about with biscuits. Microwaves can promote this too. While that creates flavor and some antioxidant compounds, the source does note that some Maillard products are potentially harmful, although it doesn't really specify which ones or under what conditions in the microwave context. It's just flagged as another complex, sometimes unpredictable outcome.
Right, so even browning proteins in a microwave isn't straightforward. Okay, we've hit the big three macromolecules. But the review also touched on some other important things, right? Like flavor, general nutrient retention, and maybe safety beyond just those TPHs we started with.
Yes, definitely. On flavor, it's a bit mixed again. Microwaves can sometimes enhance positive flavors like umami from amino acids, and maybe reduce negative ones like bitterness or astringency in some cases. But similar to the protein digestibility issue, excessive heating can damage flavor compounds or how they bind in the food.
And what about vitamins and minerals? That's a classic microwave question. Does it destroy them?
Actually, this is another area where microwaves might have an edge sometimes. The review suggests that microwave heating often results in better retention of certain vitamins, specifically mentioning vitamins A, C, E, and less breakdown of B1 and also minerals, compared to methods like boiling.
Better retention than boiling, really? Why would that be?
The likely reasons are the shorter cooking times, typical of microwaves, and the fact that you often use much less water or even no added water. With boiling, a lot of water-soluble vitamins and minerals can simply leach out into the cooking water, which then gets thrown away.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. Less time, less water, so the nutrients stay in the food more. That's a key insight.
Exactly. So for preserving certain nutrients, microwaving can actually be a superior method to something like boiling.
Okay, and lastly, safety beyond TPHs. Did it mention anything else?
Yes, and this is quite interesting. The source points out that microwave heating might help reduce or inhibit the formation of other potentially harmful compounds. For example, heterocyclic amines or HCAs.
HGAs, those are the ones formed when you char meat at high temps, right? Like grilling or frying.
That's them. Microwaving, potentially due to its speed and often lower peak temperatures compared to intense frying or grilling, might form fewer HCAs. The source also mentions microwaves can be effective at destroying aflatoxin.
Aflatoxin, that's a mold toxin, isn't it?
Correct. A nasty toxin produced by certain molds that can grow on crops like peanuts or corn. The suggestion is that microwave energy can effectively break it down. So the insight here is that for specific hazards like HCAs or aflatoxin, microwave cooking might actually offer a safety benefit compared to other methods or situations.
Okay. Wow. We have covered a ton of ground here, from hazards in a simple biscuit right down to these really complex changes in starch, fat, protein molecules, plus vitamins, minerals, flavor, other safety issues.
Yeah.
So let's try and synthesize this. If someone's listening and just trying to figure out whether to zap their lunch or heat it some other way, what's the absolute bottom line from all this?
The clearest bottom line is that microwave cooking is way more nuanced than the simple good-bad labels it often gets. It's a powerful technology that causes complex changes in food, some potentially beneficial, some potentially detrimental, and some just complicated and context-dependent.
Okay, so let's recap the potential pluses we heard about. There was the possibility of significantly lower TPHs in some foods, like those biscuits, if optimized correctly.
Right.
There was the potential increase in beneficial starches, like resistant starch, better retention of certain fats, like PUFAs and certain vitamins compared to boiling,
Yeah.
and even potential reduction of other hazards like HCAs and aflatoxin.
Correct. Those are the potential upsides highlighted.
But then there are the complexities and potential downsides. TPHs can still increase with more power or time if you're not careful or optimizing for something else, like color.
Yes.
And the effects on proteins are really unpredictable. Digestibility can go up or down, allergenicity can go up or down depending on the food, and things like the Maillard reaction are complex.
Exactly. Those protein effects, especially allergenicity, are probably the biggest area where you see that unpredictability and the need for caution.
So it really feels like the main message from these sources is you can't make sweeping statements about microwave cooking. The impact totally depends on what food you're cooking, and crucially, how you're cooking it, the power, the time, the final temperature, the moisture level. All those details matter.
Absolutely. That's the core scientific takeaway. Generalizations are risky. Understanding the real effect requires looking at the specific food process interaction. And it highlights why there's ongoing research trying to optimize microwave processes for different foods to maximize benefits and minimize risks.
It's amazing. We started with a simple snack biscuit and ended up talking about molecular structures, digestibility, and allergenicity. It just underscores how incredibly intricate food science really is.
It certainly does. There's always more going on than meets the eye or the taste buds.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If just choosing how we heat our food microwave versus oven versus boiling can have such profound and complex effects on its safety, its nutritional value, even its potential to trigger allergies, what other everyday choices or processes might be having subtle, hidden impacts on the things we consume or interact with, impacts we haven't even begun to consider yet? Definitely something to chew on next time you're reaching for the microwave button.